There is a village in the Cotswolds that appears so often on postcards and calendars that it barely seems like a real place at all. You approach it down a narrowing lane, the hedges closing in, the trees leaning overhead. Then, almost without warning, the world opens onto a small valley and a river, and there it is, Castle Combe, the stone bridge over the Bybrook, the crooked market cross. Pale cottages leaning together as if they've been whispering for centuries. On a bright afternoon, the village is full of footsteps and camera shutters. Visitors pause in the middle of the road to get the perfect shot, then shuffle aside as a local car slips past, always just a little too fast for such a small place. It's often called the prettiest village in England, and perhaps it is, but prettiness is a thin thing when you look at it for too long. Beneath the honey-colored stone lie Roman foundations. Behind the postcard-perfect street is an inn with a window no one likes to sleep beneath. Up the hill, a small church whose bell has, more than once, tolled a number it shouldn't. And beyond the cottages, up in the trees, lies a wood where voices move without bodies and laughter comes from the wrong direction. Tonight, you're not here to walk the lane with a tour group or sip tea beside the river. You're here after dark, when Castle Combe becomes quiet in a different way. When the last car has left the car park and the cottages draw in on themselves, when the river looks black under the bridge and the hills close around the village like the sides of a bowl. These are the hours when the older stories come out, so find a comfortable place to rest. Let your breathing slow. Picture the village as the dusk settles over it, the bridge, the church tower, the dim shapes of the hills. In a moment, we'll cross that bridge and meet a figure who has been standing there for far longer than any visitor with a camera, a soldier waiting on a road that no longer exists. These are haunted tales from Castle Combe. Let's begin. They told Daniel that Castle Combe was like stepping back in time. Travel blogs had used that phrase so often it meant nothing, but he had a few days off between contracts, a hire car, and a vague desire to be somewhere that didn't look like his flat in Swindon. So he followed the brown signs, dipped down through the trees, and saw the view everyone photographs. The road dropped, the woods opened. Stone bridge, slow river, a row of pale cottages holding onto the hill. It looked placed rather than grown. He parked in the main car park, walked down with his camera bumping his chest, and stepped onto the bridge. The last of the day's visitors were already drifting away. A tripod went into a bag. An engine started somewhere up the lane. The light was flat and grey. He leaned on the parapet and watched the Bybrook move underneath. The water looked darker than the postcards. Not pretty exactly, but steady. Leaves turned lazily in the current. He tried to imagine carts and horses splashing through a ford where the tarmac now lay. Roman soldiers following a line to Cirencester. He took a couple of routine shots, more out of obligation than excitement, then just stood, listening. The village behind him was quiet, a door shut. A dog barked once. The last car's sound dwindled up the hill. For a moment, he had the odd sense that the present had thinned, not vanished, just gone faint. That was when he heard the jangle of metal. It was a small sound, but distinct. The soft clash of armor plates or harness fittings shifting on a body. One step, perhaps two. He turned. A man stood at the exact center of the bridge, facing toward the village. His back was straight, shoulders square, a cloak hung to his calves, dull as old limestone. A helmet cupped his head, cheek guards throwing his face into shadow. Beneath the cloak, Daniel saw the curved segments of armor. At his side, a sword hilt. Below, bare legs and sandals. For a moment, Daniel waited for the obvious explanation. A film crew, a reenactment, some kind of event. But the cottages at the far end were shuttered and still, no cameras, no vans, no one else on the bridge. "Excuse me," Daniel said quietly. The man didn't react. The stones under Daniel's boots felt heavier, older, as if the bridge had shifted weight around him. He took a step closer. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." The centurion moved his head, just enough that Daniel saw his eyes beneath the rim of the helmet. They were not focused on him. They seemed fixed on a point beyond Daniel's shoulder, somewhere far away in both space and time. There was no curiosity in them, no recognition, just a flat, patient watchfulness. Daniel felt, with sharp certainty, that he was in someone else's place. "Sorry," he repeated, though he had no idea what he was apologizing for. The gaze slid to him for a heartbeat, as if it took effort, as if noticing him were an irritation. Daniel had the sensation of being weighed and quietly dismissed, not the right kind of soldier, not the right kind of threat. A faint breath of cold air passed between them, though the evening had been still a moment before. Then the figure turned back towards the village. Daniel looked down to break the contact. For an instant, it was not the bybrook below, but a lower, muddier stream. Crude wooden buildings clung to the far bank. Smoke hung above them. The line of the modern road dissolved into a rutted track. He blinked hard. The river snapped back into itself. Dark green water, the reflection of cottages, a lost leaf turning in a widening ring. He straightened. The bridge was empty. No cloak, no helmet. Only stone, worn smooth, and the curve of the lane into the village where a pair of tourists now ambled, heads together, oblivious, his heart was thumping. For a few seconds he nearly convinced himself he'd nodded off standing up or suffered a moment of dizziness. Then he felt the weight of his camera. It still hung from his neck, switched on. The small screen glowed dimly. At some point his finger had pressed the shutter without him noticing. He lifted it. The photograph showed the bridge and river, the cottages beyond, and a figure in the center, cloaked, helmet catching the light. The timestamp counted seconds. He stared at the empty patch of stone where the man had been. Best not stay on the bridge at dusk. The voice came from behind, quiet but close. Daniel spun. An older man in a wax jacket stood at the end of the bridge, a carrier bag in one hand. His face was ordinary, weathered. His eyes were not. They had the tired impatience of someone who has lived with a story too long. "I thought I saw someone," Daniel said. The man glanced at the camera, then back at the bridge. He looks the same every time." "You've seen him?" "Not just me." The man stepped up, careful to keep to one side of the center. "Roman road ran through here, villa up on the hill. Some say he never got the order to stand down. Is he dangerous?" The question sounded childish even as Daniel asked it, in the obvious way. "No." The man's mouth twitched. "He doesn't grab, doesn't push, doesn't even seem to know we're here." He paused, eyes on the water. But things slip around him. Time, sense. People stand in the middle and forget themselves. Start walking where there's no road anymore. One lad nearly went over that parapet a couple of years back. Said he was just trying to follow the column. Daniel glanced at the low wall, the drop to the black water. It suddenly seemed far too easy to misjudge the edge, to climb that little bit higher for a better view. "I should go," he said. "That's usually best," the man agreed. As Daniel stepped off the bridge, the pressure in the air eased. The cottages looked more like buildings and less like scenery. The river sounded ordinary again. He looked back only once. The stone arch lay bare, just a bridge in a pretty village. Even so, for the rest of his stay, he kept away from the center when he crossed, walking tight to the side, fingers brushing old stone. And at night, when he closed his eyes. He sometimes found himself back in that narrow stretch above the water, watching a soldier who didn't know he was dead stare down a road that had long since forgotten him, and feeling faintly that if he stood there too long, he might forget which century he belonged to as well. By the time Amelia reached the castle inn, the village felt almost staged. The last of the day trippers were heading up the hill, cameras away, coats pulled tighter. The bridge and market cross sat in the fading light like a set that had just been cleared between shots. Perfect, she thought. She wanted somewhere quiet to work, not to be charmed. Inside, the inn was all low beams and low voices. The landlord, neat and precise, gave her a key. "Room 3, he said. "Top of the first flight. Breakfast 8 to 9. If the electrics play up, knock the office." The corridor smelled of polish and old wood. Portraits of unsmiling people followed her up the stairs. Room 3 was compact but fine. A bed, a squashy chair, a wardrobe that didn't quite shut, and a deep-set window with little leaded panes overlooking the street. From the sill, she could see almost the whole postcard view. Market cross, bridge, a sliver of river. The sky was flattening to a dull metal color. She cracked the window for air, then caught her reflection in the glass. Hair scraped up, gray smudges beneath her eyes from deadlines and trains. The curtains framed her like brackets. She grimaced at herself and turned away to unpack. The first odd thing happened in the bathroom. As she brushed her teeth, she saw her reflection in the small mirror twitch. It was a tiny thing, a delay, half a beat out of time. Her raised hand seemed to lag, as if the image were following rather than mirroring. She blinked hard. The reflection snapped back into perfect sync, toothbrush foam and all. She spat, rinsed, and told herself it was tiredness and bad lighting, old buildings' warped lines. Mirrors lied. Later, she sat on the bed with her laptop, the only bright rectangle in the dim room. The inn had settled to a familiar background of clinks and pipes. The cursor blinked at the end of a stubborn sentence. Her eyes drifted to the window. The glass showed the room behind her, and beyond it, the muted village, a thin mist had started to cling to the river. Light from the church tower and the odd cottage pooled in small, soft halos. Someone stood by the market cross, a woman, by the look of her, long, pale dress, hair pulled back. She was very still, facing the inn with her hands folded. Amelia frowned. She hadn't heard footsteps or a car. She leaned closer, then rose and went to the window. The street below was empty. When she looked back at the glass, her reflection stared out at the village. And behind that reflection, in the part of the image that should have shown the bedroom, the woman waited. She was positioned just over Amelia's shoulder in the doubled room. The distorted glass blurred her features, but the outline of head and shoulders was clear enough. The fall of the dress, the stillness. Amelia did not turn around. The urge was there, immediate, almost physical. But some deep, older instinct told her not to. Instead, she kept her eyes on the reflection, every nerve tightening. "Old building," she murmured, voice too loud in the small space. "Weird glass, that's all." The figure behind her did not move. She watched the image for a long minute, feeling the muscles between her shoulder blades knot. The woman's head tipped a fraction, as if sniffing the air. Amelia, irrationally, lifted her hand and waved once. Her reflected self did the same. The figure did not. Then, very slowly, the pale face in the glass leaned closer, as if pushing against the inside of the pane. The distortions of the old glass stretched her features, but the mouth was unmistakable. Thin, tight, wrong. A tiny tap sounded, then another, a third, the precise, hollow sound of fingernails on glass. Amelia stepped back so fast her calves hit the bed. There was nothing behind her. Bed, wardrobe, suitcase, laptop. But the air felt crowded, as if someone else had just stepped out of her way. She grabbed her key and went straight downstairs. The landlord looked up from a ledger as she approached. His expression was politely neutral until he saw hers. Then something in it tightened just for a second. "Everything all right, Miss Harper?" She hesitated, suddenly aware of how strange it would sound. Is there anything odd about the window in room 3? She asked. He set his pen down carefully. Odd how? The reflection, she said, hating the thin edge in her own voice. It doesn't quite keep up. And I thought I saw someone behind me. But when I looked, there was no one there, he finished, almost gently. They regarded each other. The room's safe, he said at last. Electrics, floorboards, all sound. But if you'd rather move, I can put you in number 5. Not much of a view, but some people sleep better. What's the story? She asked, because leaving without knowing felt worse. He sighed. There used to be a maid here, he said. Top floor mostly. Room turn-downs, laundry. Got herself tangled with a guest. Promises, trouble, the usual. His gaze flicked towards the ceiling. She went out that window during a storm. Maybe she slipped. Maybe she chose. Depends who you ask. He folded his hands. Since then, we've had the same reports. Reflections moving wrong. A woman in the glass where no one is standing. A sense of someone at your shoulder. It doesn't happen every night, but it happens often enough. Has anyone seen her face? Amelia asked before she could stop herself. Not properly, he said, and that's probably a kindness. He hesitated. One guest years back claimed that when he looked, he didn't see her at all. He saw himself, same age, different clothes, standing in the street and looking up. A day or two later, he passed through the village on a coach tour and said he recognized the exact moment Amelia felt the back of her neck prickle. I'll take number 5, she said. He nodded and traded keys. That night, in the quieter room at the back, she fell asleep, imagining a woman in soaked skirts, balanced on a stone sill, unable to decide whether she wanted to live or make someone else live the moment for her. In the morning, when she stepped out for air, she made the mistake of glancing up. Room 3's window stared back, blank and dark. For a second, she saw herself in it, tiny from the street, head tipped back. Then another shape leaned into the reflection, just behind her own, the suggestion of a hand at her shoulder, fingers splayed. She blinked and it was gone. She took her photograph of the famous view and walked on, feeling watched. And for the rest of her stay, whenever she passed the castle inn and felt the tug to look up at that deep-set window, she kept her gaze fixed on the cobbles instead, sensing, without needing to test it, that the glass was always ready to offer someone a place on its side of the story. For most of his life, Peter had treated church bells as scenery. They were part of the background. Sunday mornings, weddings, the odd funeral, something you noticed and then forgot. He started listening properly after his heart attack. The consultant had been calm but blunt. There was damage, there were risks, there would need to be changes, less stress, fewer trains. Stay somewhere quiet for a while, she'd said. He picked Castle Combe because he remembered it from a drive years earlier, a ridiculous, pretty little place sunk in a fold of the hills. He rented a cottage for a month, imagined gentle walks and early nights, and arrived with a bag full of pills and good intentions. St. Andrew's Church stood at the top of the village, its tower square and plain above the roofs. From his kitchen window, he could just see the upper stones. The bell inside stayed silent most of the time. The first time it rang 13, he assumed he'd miscounted. It was a grey Thursday evening. He was frying something bland at the hob when the slow tolling began. Without thinking, he counted along. 9, 10, 11, 12. The next note was late enough that his mind had time to decide it was finished. Then the sound came again, lower and oddly flat. 13. He waited, fork in midair, for a 14th. Nothing. He finished cooking, told himself he'd added one in his head out of habit, and tried not to think about it. The second time, there was no room for doubt. Rain had kept him indoors all day. The village street outside was slick and empty. As dusk thickened, the bells started up again. He turned the radio off and stood by the window. 10, 11, 12. The pause was measured, like an intake of breath. 13. As the last vibration drained out of the air, a small, sharp ache pinched behind his ribs. He sat down slowly, hand on his chest. It passed after a minute, leaving him shaky and irritated at himself for being dramatic. He told himself he was jumpy because of the diagnosis. Bells didn't mean anything. Not really. The next morning he walked up to the churchyard. St. Andrew's looked the way all old churches look, used, leaning a little, solid anyway. Gravestones sagged at every angle, their inscriptions softened to suggestions. "Morning," someone said. A woman in a waterproof with a basket of flowers smiled at him. She had the self-possessed air of someone who belonged to the place. "Morning," he replied. "I'm renting the little cottage by the bend. Thought I'd have a look around. Nice spot," she said. "I'm Margaret. I do the flowers." He hesitated. "Can I ask a slightly odd question?" he said. "Do the bells ever ring wrong? Add a stroke?" Her smile went thin. "You've heard 13, she said. "Twice," he admitted. "I thought." He trailed off. Saying it aloud felt like making it real. "They don't miscount," she said. "Not on their own. We barely have proper ringers these days, just the odd Sunday. But every now and then the bell goes by itself. Always the same 12, then a pause, then one more." "And?" he said. "And it tends to do it before something changes," she replied. "Illness, an accident, a bit of bad news that was already on its way." He looked up at the tower. "Superstition," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "If you like," she said. "But my husband's stroke came the week after it rang. My sister's diagnosis, the day after. I'm not saying it caused anything. It just announces." She laid her flowers on a low stone and straightened. "Best thing you can do," she added, "is not to invite it. Don't count. Don't listen. It's like someone knocking at a door you don't want to open." That evening he did his best not to listen. He left the radio on, washed dishes slowly, talked to himself about nothing in particular. When the first toll rolled over the village, he froze anyway. He turned the radio down, then off. 7, 8, 9, 10. His heart kept time in his chest. 11, 12. He told himself to stop counting. The silence between 12 and what might come next seemed to swell until the cottage walls were thin with it. 13. The note landed hard. Pain flared again in his chest, hotter this time, sliding down his arm. His hand clamped on the edge of the sink. "Not yet," he whispered to the tiled wall, the empty air. "Please." Not yet. The ache ebbed, leaving a hollow weakness. The next morning, on Margaret's advice and his doctor's, he took a bus to the nearest hospital and sat in a waiting room that smelled of disinfectant and old paper while machines traced lines from his heart. The consultant frowned in a way that made his stomach turn. "You're very lucky you came in," she said. "We'll keep you in and schedule a procedure. We caught this just in time." That night in the ward, he slept in short, sharp stretches. Once, just before dawn, he dreamed he was standing beneath the bell. It loomed above him in the dark, metal skin dulled, rope hanging still. As he watched, it turned slowly, and he saw that its surface was patterned not with writing, but with small blurred faces pressed outward. Some looked furious, some looked tired. All of them looked like they knew exactly how long he had. When he woke, gray light seeped around the curtains. A nurse was checking his drip. His heart monitor beeped, steady and indifferent. The procedure went well. He spent a week recovering, then came back to the village on lighter medication and stricter instructions. The first thing he did was walk up to the church. The bell was quiet. He met Margaret coming out. "It hasn't rung," he said. She looked him over in a way that reminded him of the consultant. "It doesn't need to," she said. "You listened. Do you think it knew?" he asked, then felt foolish for giving the question shape. She glanced at the tower. "I think it's like standing on a cliff with a strong wind," she said. "The edge is already there. The bell just lets you feel it." Years later, in other places, whenever he heard bells, he caught himself counting under his breath, despite himself. If they stopped at 12, he let his shoulders drop. If there was the faintest echo of another note, imagined or otherwise, he found his hand drifting unconsciously to the scar on his chest and to the memory of a square tower over a small Cotswold village where something ancient and patient had taken the trouble to knock on his door. Parsonage Wood was the sort of place guidebooks called a pleasant stroll, neat paths, dappled light, a gentle rise toward the ridge. Nothing that should have made Tom uneasy, yet from the moment he stepped beneath the trees, he felt as though he were walking into a room where someone had just stopped speaking. He blamed the cottage owner at first. She'd mentioned the wood while handing over the keys. "Lovely walk up there," she'd said. Then, after a pause, "Don't go past the boundary stone if it turns misty. Sound travels oddly in the trees." He'd expected coy village folklore. Instead, he found himself slowing after only 100 meters because the quiet felt wrong, not peaceful expectant. He checked his phone. No signal. Not unusual, he told himself. He kept walking. The path wound gently upward, the trees closing in a little at a time. A blackbird burst out of a shrub, making him jump. "Get a grip," he muttered. Ahead, the trail forked. A moss-covered stone sat at the junction, its surface rough with age, inscription long lost. He hesitated only a moment before choosing the left path, purely because it felt more open. 10 steps later, he heard someone laugh. It wasn't close, it wasn't far. It had the thin, drifting quality of sound heard across water, directionless, slightly warped. He turned, scanning the trees. "Hello?" he called. No answer. He waited, listening. A breeze moved high in the canopy, but the trunks around him stayed still. He kept walking, forcing his pace to remain steady. Every so often, a snatch of sound reached him. A mutter, a sigh, the soft fall of a footstep that didn't match his own. Each time he stopped, the noise dissolved. At the next bend, he paused again. Someone was humming. A man, by the sound of it. A few notes, repeated without melody. The sound came from ahead, or behind, or above. He couldn't place it. "Anyone there?" he called. The humming cut off. Ahead, the path narrowed, then dipped. Mist pooled in the hollow, faint but definite. He remembered the owner's warning. "Don't go past the boundary stone if it turns misty." He turned back the way he'd come. The path behind him was clear at first, the mossy stone visible between the trunks. He let out a breath and started toward it. Halfway back, the air shifted. It felt thicker, cooler. The ground underfoot seemed to take sound differently. His footsteps landed softly, as if cushioned. The space between the trees looked unchanged, but he felt watched. A voice whispered, very close to his ear, "Wait." He spun. nothing but trees and shadow. His pulse hammered. He walked faster. Another voice joined the first, then another, not speaking, breathing, as if matching his pace, as if circling. He tried to focus on the stone ahead. It didn't seem any closer. "Stop it," he said through his teeth. "You're tired, you're jumpy, that's all." But the voices went on, overlapping, breathy, soft as hands brushing bark, not conversational, not even shaped words, just presence. When the laughter came again, it sounded less like amusement and more like recognition. He stumbled and broke into a run. The air thickened, muffling his movements. The trees seemed to lean inward. The boundary stone vanished behind a veil of mist, then reappeared suddenly at his left, far closer than it should have been. He skidded to a halt. The whispering ceased. In the stillness, he realized he could hear something else. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from just beyond the line of the trees, heavy enough to belong to someone large, too steady to be an animal. He backed away, heart slamming against his ribs. The footsteps stopped. He stood frozen for several long seconds before forcing himself to move. He didn't run this time. Running felt like something prey would do. He walked, brisk, controlled, until he reached the stone. As he passed it, the air seemed to ease. The pressure lifted. The trees straightened subtly, and the normal forest sounds returned. A bird, a branch creaking, the distant trickle of a stream. He didn't look back. When he reached the cottage, the owner was in the garden deadheading roses. She took one look at him and set her tools aside. "You went past the stone," she said. He shook his head. "I tried not to. There was mist, sounds, people. I couldn't see anyone." "That's why you don't go in if the fog's forming," she said. "That wood holds sound. Some say it remembers it. Others say it collects the voices of anyone who's gone missing up there." He swallowed. "Missing?" "Not recently," she said quickly. "But old woods keep old stories. And if you've got trouble on your mind, or you're not quite yourself, it notices." He didn't want to ask, but the question forced itself out. What happens if someone goes too far in? She hesitated. "Some come out wrong," she said at last. "Some don't come out at all." He slept poorly that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt again the breath of someone leaning in to whisper. Once, half dreaming, he heard humming through the cottage wall, the same shapeless little tune drifting in from the dark. He left the village a day early. Weeks later, walking through a perfectly ordinary stand of trees near his own home, he caught himself stopping to listen. Not because he heard anything, but because for a moment he felt the distinct, unmistakable sensation of someone just out of sight, pausing to waiting for him to step past an invisible line. Eliza arrived in Castle Combe reluctantly. The cottage she'd booked had looked idyllic, online stone walls, roses, a view of the hills, but she'd chosen it for one reason only: distance. She needed somewhere quiet to think, to breathe, to stop replaying the last month in sharp, looping fragments. The owner met her with a polite smile, and the keys. "Church is just up the rise," she said. "St. Andrew's. Lovely walk at sunset, though I suppose everyone says that." Eliza made a non-committal sound and carried her suitcase inside. The first evening she didn't leave the cottage at all. She sat on the low sofa, listening to the small sounds of an unfamiliar space pipes ticking, wood settling, wind nudging the eaves. By 9, she was exhausted in the way that comes after too much thinking and not enough sleep. She went to bed early. At some point in the night, she woke without knowing why the cottage was quiet. Her phone screen showed 2:14 a.m. She listened for the noise that had roused her but heard nothing but her own pulse. After a few moments, she went to the window. Moonlight lay pale and thin over the lane. Beyond the last cottage, the churchyard rose gently, its yew tree a black crouched shape against the sky. Someone stood beneath it. A woman, still as a carved figure. Her clothing seemed white or pale gray, the fabric hanging straight to the ground, unmoving in the breeze. Eliza blinked hard, leaned closer to the glass. The figure was gone. She waited a long time before returning to bed, telling herself it had been a trick of shadow, an exhausted mind filling in shapes in the dark. The next day, she walked into the village for groceries. The church tower loomed quietly at the far end of the street. On impulse, she took the path up the rise and into the churchyard. It was smaller than she expected. The graves old, their inscriptions eroded. The yew tree was larger up close, vast, twisting, its branches an umbrella of shadow. She touched the bark. It was cool and rough. There was no woman. She told herself she was relieved. That night she slept better, but woke again in the small hours. No sound, just the same sharp awareness. She went to the window. The woman was there again, standing under the yew. This time the figure was turned slightly towards her. Not enough to distinguish features, but enough to suggest attention, as if aware of being watched. Eliza's breath caught. She stepped back from the glass. The woman moved. A small movement, head lifting a fraction. Then the pale shape seemed to drift, not walk, across the churchyard, dissolving into the shadowed gravestones. Eliza didn't sleep again. In the morning she returned to the church. The vicar was just unlocking the door, a tall man with creased hands and a gentle expression. "Morning," he said. "Sightseeing? I think I saw someone here last night," she said before she could stop herself. "A woman, under the yew." He hesitated with the key in the lock. "Describe her," he said. "Tall, pale dress." "She didn't walk." He nodded once, slowly. "You're not the first," he said. "People have been seeing her for as long as I've been here." "Who is she?" "No one knows for certain. Some say she was a nun from centuries back. Some say a woman who died waiting for a letter. Others he stopped well. Old stories, none of them cheerful." "What does she want?" Eliza asked, before realizing how strange the question was. His expression softened in a way that made her uncomfortable. "Wanting is a living thing," he said. "I'm not sure she remembers she once had wants." The church interior was dim and cool. Eliza sat for a moment in a pew, hands clasped, letting the silence settle around her. It was a sincere silence, not empty, like a place holding its breath. When she stepped back outside, the yew cast a long diagonal shadow across the grass. She stood looking at it a long time. That night, she braced herself for another waking. It came at 2:07 a.m. She rose, crossed to the window, and looked out. The woman was not by the yew this time. She was closer, standing on the path that led down toward the cottages. Eliza's stomach dropped. The figure's head was angled downwards, as if examining the stones beneath her feet. Her hands hung loosely at her sides. Slowly, so slowly the movement was almost imperceptible, she lifted her head and looked towards Eliza's window. Eliza stepped back into the shadows of the room, heart hammering. She shouldn't have looked again. She knew that. But something pulled at her. The same morbid fascination that makes people slow down at accidents. She leaned forward. The woman was no longer on the path. She was at the edge of the lane. Eliza stumbled back, breath tight in her chest. She fumbled for her phone, but her hands were shaking too much to switch on the torch. When she looked again, the lane was empty. No footsteps, no rustling, nothing. She barely slept. By morning, with sunlight softening the edges of the cottages, the fear felt dreamlike. But she knew better. She went back to the church. The vicar was arranging hymn books. "I think she got closer," Eliza said quietly. He shut the book in his hands. "They do," he said. "If someone is open, open to what?" "To being seen," he said, "to carrying things. Grief can make you easy to find." She swallowed. "Does she ever come inside the cottages?" "Not that I know of," he said. "But if she's following you, it means she recognizes something in you, something unfinished." Eliza walked back slowly, feeling the weight of his words. That night she sat awake in bed, lamp on, trying to read. The cottage creaked gently, settling into the cool. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock. 2. A soft sound came from outside, not footsteps, not knocking, breathing. Slow, measured breathing just beyond the window, as if someone stood inches from the glass. Not fogging it, not touching it, just listening. Eliza felt the world tighten around her. She did not move, did not breathe, did not blink. After a minute, the sound faded. The air eased. The night exhaled. She sat frozen until dawn. In the morning, she packed her bag and left the key on the table. She drove out of the village without looking back at the church or the yew or the lane that curved behind the cottages. Weeks later, in a different town, she woke at 2:14 a.m. with her heart pounding. She went to her window. There was nothing outside, nothing at all. But she stood there a long time, staring into the dark, listening, because for one thin, terrifying moment, she could have sworn she felt someone else waiting just behind the glass, patient as the dead, remembering her by the shape of her grief. The tourists have gone now. The last car has climbed the hill and disappeared. The tea rooms are dark, chairs stacked, doors bolted. The river moves under the bridge in a slow, unbothered way. Mist gathers in the hollow of the valley, softening edges, blurring light. In one of the cottages, a lamp is still on, casting a small circle of gold onto a page or a plate. Somewhere a dog shifts in its sleep. A clock ticks on a mantelpiece. Ordinary lives folded into the ordinary deep of night. But Castle Combe is not quite empty. On the bridge, in that narrow middle space, most people hurry across without thinking. A soldier sometimes stands, keeping watch over a road that vanished centuries ago, unaware of the cameras that sometimes catch him in passing. In one small room of the Castle Inn, a window remembers the weight of someone who once climbed too far onto its sill. The glass holds more than one reflection, and not all of them belong to the living up in the church tower. The bell waits, patient and heavy, for the rare nights when it will be asked to speak one note more than custom allows. It does not ring often. It does not need to. Beyond the village, Parsonage Wood breathes. Voices move through it like wind through leaves, retelling old stories, testing new footsteps, deciding who to keep and who to let go. And on the rise by St. Andrew's, under the watch of the yew, a white figure walks her slow, measured route between stones, pausing now and then as if listening for a name about to be called Castle Combe in the brochures is all daylight and charm. But when you close your eyes and let sleep take you, remember the other village that shares the same stone and river, the one that comes out when the lanes are empty and the lights are off. The village of watchful things, patient bells, and figures that keep to their paths. Rest now. Let the river run under the bridge, the bell stay still, the wood hold its breath. The ghosts of Castle Combe have walked their rounds for tonight. They'll still be there in the morning. Please subscribe to this channel to be alerted to the next episode of Ghosts of the Cotswolds.